Hi. We've done some videos on Neil Postman before. Neil Postman, this time, Conscientious, Objections, 1988. We've done videos on his most famous book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, which I'll link at the end. This one, on the front cover subhead, is Stirring Up Trouble About Language, Technology, and Education. And the blurb on the back says, in a series of feisty and ultimately hopeful essays, one of America's sharpest social critics casts a shrewd eye over contemporary culture to reveal the worst and the best of our habits of discourse, tendencies in education, and obsessions with technological novelty. Readers will find themselves rethinking many of their bedrock assumptions. Should education transmit culture or defend us against it? Is technological innovation progress or a peculiarly American addiction? When everyone watches the same television programs and television producers don't discriminate between the audiences for Sesame Street and Dynasty, is childhood anything more than a sentimental concept? Writing in the traditions of Orwell and H.L. Mencken, Neil Postman sends shockwaves of wit and critical intelligence through the cultural wasteland. And of course, this is written before the onset of internet. So the optimism, the hopefulness that is in the first sentence here, one wonders if Postman were still alive, would he be at all hopeful? Now, but here's what he said in 1988. Some of the essays are about the triumphs of one-eyed technology, and in particular how these triumphs have laid waste some of our most creative, not to mention charming, habits of thought. I call technology one-eyed because, like Cyclops, it sees only what is directly in front of it. I am not, let it be said, some latter-day Luddite. I raise no complaint against a machine doing what it was designed to do. After all, who expects a machine to notice its own side effects, to care about the social and psychic consequences of its own presence? Machines ask no questions, have no peripheral vision or depth perception. They see the future through the fixed eye of their technical possibilities. But it is well said that in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. In America, and increasingly in Europe, technology is a one-eyed king, ruling unopposed amidst idiot cheering. I object to this state of affairs, and I would like some of my essays to lend support to lively discussions of where we're being taken, and in whose interests, by the unfettered development of technology. It's clear enough that our engineers, not our poets, are the unacknowledged legislators of our time, and perhaps this is as it should be. But unless there is a vigorous opposition party, technological tyranny is inevitable. Man cannot live by electric wiring alone, and this obvious fact must be part of any plans we make for the future. A second theme in these essays may be placed under the heading, the humiliation of the word, which of course has everything to do with the first theme. The phrase is taken from one of Jacques Ellul's books, and I use it here because it is both a provocative and an accurate metaphor for one of the more distressing consequences of what Ellul calls the technological society, that the power, utility, and prestige of the word have been significantly diminished. Ellul attributes this decline to the rise of and omnipresence of visual forms of communication, not only film and video technology, but also posters, billboards, cartoons, art reproductions, photograph, and of course advertising in all its manifestations. Ellul's complaint is essentially the same one made by Daniel Boorstin in his famous book of a quarter of a century ago, The Image. And it was made even before that by Rudolph Arnheim in his book, Film as Art. Others have worried just as much about the humiliation of the word. Harold Innis, for example, in one of his last essays, A Plea for Time, argued that the speed, range, and impersonality of modern media undermine the oral tradition and therefore weaken the possibility of a nourishing community life. And in these days, when lying is called misspeaking or disinformation, one cannot forget George Orwell, who concluded that in the age of advertising and public relations, newspeak becomes the normal mode of discourse. Indeed, for 40 years, a conversation has taken place among our most prescient social critics about the alarming decline of both the spoken and the written word as instruments of civilized discourse. Some of my essays are intended to contribute to that conversation, although with perhaps less optimism than I can usually muster. I am constrained by the thought that the decline of language may have proceeded so far that most people no longer perceive it as a problem. An analogy here might clarify what I mean. It is said that the brain is the only organ of our body that feels no pain and therefore does not know when it is injured. The brain does not regard brain damage as a problem. If we think of language as the brain of a civilization, then it is possible that severe language damage may not be perceived by the social body as a problem. It is possible that we have adapted ourselves to disinformation, to newspeak, to public relations hype, to imagery disguised as thought, to picture newspapers and magazines, to religion revealed in the form of entertainment, to politics in the form of a 30-second television commercial. In adapting ourselves, we come to accept the present situation as the only available standard and conclude with Dr. Pangloss that this is the best of all possible worlds. But perhaps this is not the case. There does appear to be a national concern about illiteracy, illiteracy, and the persisting decline in our young people's analytic ability. There is even a movement, as I write, that wants to give the highest priority to teaching critical thinking in the schools, which leads to a third theme of these essays, education, a subject never far from the issues raised by technology and language. By my reckoning, the three most traumatic conflicts in Western education occurred first in the 5th century BC, when Athens was undergoing a change from an oral culture to an alphabet writing culture. Second, the 16th century AD, when Europe underwent a radical transformation as a result of the printing press. And third, now, in the late 20th century, as a result of the electronic revolution, particularly the invention of television. It has been wisely said by the great historian of American education, Lawrence Cremin, that whenever America needs a revolution, it gets a new school curriculum. He meant to suggest that our schools are always the focal point of our attempts to understand and resolve new conditions of culture. The subject of education is vibrant and filled with challenge precisely because no one knows what it should be like in our own times. We are safe in assuming only that what we are presently doing is wrong, an irresistible situation for a complainer. There are three last points in need of mention. First, some of the essays were composed to be spoken, and I have let them remain in that form. After several attempts to make them more hospitable to a conventional standard of exposition, I had to acknowledge that the discipline required in directing one's remarks to a specific audience enforced an economy of expression that was too easily lost if one tampered with the text. Second, a brief prologue to each essay, or in some cases to abrasive essays, explains the circumstances or the question that produced it, the context that gave life to my grievance. I know the essays must stand or fall on their own merits, but the Jewish mother in me made me think that a word or two about their pedigree might get them off to a good start. Finally, among the several synonyms for the word conscientious is the word dutiful. That is the meaning I mostly had in mind in choosing the book's title, Conscientious Objections. Sometimes it is great fun to complain, and in America it can even be profitable. But unless one's complaints are grounded in a sense of duty to one's country or to a recognizable humane tradition, they're not worthy of serious attention. Therefore, I write as a devoted patriot who wishes to celebrate the best by noticing the worst. Readers must decide if I have found a unique and prudent form in which to do this. So that's the end of the preface to Conscientious Objections. Neil Postman. Put a link in to the video we shot on amusing, I think it was 2 or 3, amusing ourselves to death. So the first one is linked.